He was the most feared and respected pilot of World War I, a man whose legend grew with every plane he shot down. Manfred von Richthofen, better known as the Red Baron, struck terror into the hearts of his enemies. With 80 confirmed kills, he became the deadliest fighter pilot in history. But how did a young aristocrat from Germany become the face of aerial combat? And what drove him to chase his enemies in the skies, risking everything in pursuit of victory? Join us as we explore the life of the Red Baron, the man who could never be stopped in the air. Manfred von Richthofen was born on May 2, 1892, in the German Empire, into a family of aristocratic military tradition. The von Richthofen family was not just noble, they were steeped in the discipline and honor of the Prussian military. Growing up in a large family, Manfred was expected to follow in the footsteps of his relatives, serving in the military. Though his early life was privileged, it was also filled with the rigorous expectations of his rank. However, as a young man, Manfred didn't initially embrace the path set out for him. Instead of following in his family's footsteps as a cavalry officer, he was initially enrolled in a school to become a soldier, a decision that would later take him to the skies. In the early years of World War I, Manfred von Richthofen began his military service as a cavalry officer on the Eastern Front. However, it wasn't long before he realized that modern warfare was shifting, and the old ways of combat were no longer effective. The cavalry charge was being replaced by mechanized units, and, most crucially, aviation. The war in the skies, with its thrilling dogfights and aerial tactics, fascinated Richthofen, and he saw a new form of combat that would play to his strengths. In 1915, after just a year of service on the ground, Richthofen transferred to the Air Force, where he would quickly rise to fame. At first, Richthofen had little to distinguish him from the other pilots in the German Luftstreitkräfte. He was a competent, though unremarkable, pilot. However, what set him apart was his growing tactical brilliance and his willingness to push the limits of aerial combat. It was in 1916, during the Battle of Verdun, that he claimed his first aerial victory, downing a French aircraft. This initial success sparked something in Richthofen, igniting his competitive spirit and hunger for victory. From then on, he would go on to become the most successful and feared fighter pilot in history. By 1917, Richthofen's reputation had grown significantly. He was transferred to command the famous fighter squadron, Jagdstaffel 11, which was painted in the now iconic red color that would earn him the nickname, the Red Baron. It was not only the color of his aircraft that struck fear into the hearts of the enemy, it was the speed and precision with which he struck. He and his squadron became the terror of the skies over the Western Front, using tactics that had never been seen before. The Red Baron's flying style was marked by patience and skill. He would carefully stalk his prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike with deadly accuracy. Richthofen's success in the air wasn't just due to his flying skill set, was his ability to strategize and think several steps ahead of his opponents. He was known for attacking from below and behind, where he could take advantage of the enemy's blind spots, and he was one of the first pilots to organize and execute coordinated group attacks. While other pilots engaged in reckless solo dogfights, Richthofen believed in working as a team. He would lead his squadron in a way that allowed them to work together to overwhelm their targets, a method that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. However, despite his rapid rise, Richthofen was not immune to the constant pressure and the horrors of war. As the war continued into 1917, the German Luftstreitkräfte suffered significant losses, and the skies over Europe became more dangerous than ever. Richthofen's squadron faced increasing numbers of enemy pilots, many of whom were desperate to claim the Red Baron's scalp. The Allies knew that taking down Richthofen would be a significant blow to German morale, so they began to hunt him down with an intensity that matched his own. But despite the growing threats and challenges, Richthofen remained untouchable, had become a symbol of invincibility. But even for a man as skilled as Richthofen, there are always risks. As he became more famous, the pressure mounted, and enemies grew more determined to bring him down. What would happen when the Red Baron finally faced an enemy who would not be so easily outmaneuvered? His story was about to take a tragic turn. By 1917, Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, had reached the peak of his career as a fighter pilot. His name was synonymous with fear, precision, and unmatched skill in the air. As his fame spread throughout the world, Richthofen became the target of every Allied pilot, determined to take him down. However, his rise to greatness wasn't without its challenges. Richthofen was initially a relatively unknown pilot, but his natural instincts, his ability to read the battlefield, and his unwavering focus on perfecting aerial tactics quickly made him stand out. Early on, he had made the decision to focus on precision and discipline, rather than engaging in the reckless dogfights that were common among many pilots at the time. His methodology was simple but incredibly effective: stalked his targets, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the moment arrived, his attack was always swift, deadly, and calculated. Unlike his counterparts, who often took part in chaotic and spontaneous dogfights, Richthofen preferred methodical strikes that allowed him to take control of the situation, rather than letting the fight dictate his actions. This approach paid off, and by the middle of 1917, Richthofen was becoming a legend, having accumulated numerous victories. He had already exceeded 40 kills, and his reputation only grew with each new engagement. He was widely regarded as the epitome of German military prowess in the air. His fame wasn't just a product of his skill as a pilot, but also his leadership. As the leader of Jägerschwader 1, JG-1, or Richthofen's Flying Circus, his squadron became one of the most feared and respected in the sky. The squadron was known for its impeccable coordination, its ability to strike in unison, and its strategic approach to aerial combat. The Red Baron instilled discipline in his pilots and led them with a sense of purpose that made them a cohesive unison, efficient killing machine that worked like a well-oiled machine. However, this growing fame came with its own set of challenges. The more successful he became, the more he attracted the attention of his enemies, and the more determined they were to bring him down. The Allies recognized that if they could eliminate the Red Baron, it would not only deal a blow to German morale, but it would also be a significant psychological victory. The British and French air forces started to take extreme measures to counter the Red Baron. Specialized squadrons were formed with the sole purpose of hunting him down, and a special effort was made to target his squadron. The Allies began employing new tactics and strategies designed to overwhelm the Red Baron's strengths and finally bring him to justice. As the Allies adapted and began to learn from his tactics, Richthofen started to feel the mounting pressure. The psychological toll of constantly being the target of every Allied pilot was not something he could easily ignore. Despite his calm demeanor and steely resolve, the Red Baron was human, and the emotional and mental strain began to affect him. The stresses of leadership, the relentless pressure to continue winning, and the psychological weight of knowing that everyone in the sky wanted to bring him down were starting to take a toll on his well-being. Yet even with the mounting pressure, Richthofen remained determined and resolute, pushing himself and his squadron to new heights. Though his success continued, Richthofen's luck began to shift. By the spring of 1918, he had amassed 80 kills, a staggering feat that cemented his status as the top fighter pilot in the world. However, as the war raged on, the Allies became more adept at targeting him. The intensity of the dogfights and the constant threat from enemy squadrons began to erode his previously untouchable status. Richthofen's once invincible tactics were no longer as effective against an increasingly skilled and determined enemy. It was clear that the more famous he became, the more exposed he was. The Allies had finally caught on to his methods, and the war in the skies had become much more dangerous. Despite these growing challenges, the Red Baron continued to lead his squadron, engaging in dogfights, staying as aggressive as ever, and trying to maintain his dominance. He continued to rack up kills, but as the Allied forces started to catch up to him, the thrill of the hunt was replaced by a more dangerous reality. He had enemies closing in from every direction, and it seemed inevitable that he would eventually face someone who could match or even surpass his legendary skills. The mounting pressure was becoming too much to bear, and even for a man as skilled as the Red Baron, there was only so much that could be done. Richthofen's fate was sealed on a fateful day in April 1918, when he took to the skies one last time. By now it was clear that the Red Baron had been the subject of intense efforts from the Allies to finally bring him down. His final fight would come in a place and at a time that he could not have anticipated, and in a way that would forever alter the course of World War I. Despite all his brilliance, strategy, and determination, the Red Baron's final chapter would come not from the hands of a fellow ace, but from the unlikeliest of places. The Red Baron had survived countless dogfights and emerged victorious from numerous close calls, but his final battle would be one like no other. As he soared across the skies on that fateful day in April 1918, would his enemies finally succeed in ending his reign of terror, or could he defy the odds once again? The 21st of April, 1918, was the day that would change the course of history. The Red Baron, now the most famous fighter pilot in the world, took to the skies one last time. Manfred von Richthofen had already flown countless missions, earning the admiration of his allies and the terror of his enemies. But on this fateful day, the combination of circumstances, his enemies' relentless pursuit, and perhaps even a twist of fate, would bring an end to his legendary career in the air. On that morning, Richthofen's squadron was engaged in a dogfight over the Somme region of France. As he chased down a British Sopwith Camel, a plane he had become familiar with, he was spotted by several Allied forces, including Canadian and Australian pilots, who had been alerted to his presence. They knew that capturing the Red Baron alive or dead would have a massive impact on the morale of both the German and Allied forces. As the pursuit unfolded, Richthofen, as always, was focused on his target. He had flown into enemy territory, and as he pressed his attack, the conditions of the battlefield had shifted against him. Richthofen's aircraft was a striking sight. His bright red Fokker Doctor 1 triplane, a symbol of fear and precision in the sky, now faced its greatest test. As he descended into a more dangerous part of the battle, he was too focused on capturing his target to notice the deadly danger closing in from below. It wasn't just the British and French pilots that were determined to bring him down. There were ground-based gunners who had been lying in wait, hoping for the perfect shot. In that moment, as Richthofen maneuvered into position to take down the enemy plane, his fate would be sealed. A single shot rang out from the ground. The bullet struck Richthofen in the chest, piercing his lung. Despite his incredible skill and ability to stay focused on the task at hand, the Red Baron was struck by the bullet that would end his career. His plane went into a steep dive. Though he struggled to regain control, the damage was too severe. His Fokker Doctor I spiraled out of control and crashed to the ground near the village of Vaux-sur-Somme. The Red Baron was dead. The greatest fighter pilot of World War I, with 80 confirmed kills to his name, had been brought down by a single bullet. His death, though expected by many who had seen the risks of his constant pursuit, was still a shocking blow to the German forces. The Red Baron had come to symbolize Germany's might in the air, and with his death, the Allies had achieved a psychological victory. His body was recovered by Australian troops, and despite the respect given to him as a pilot, the news of his death was spread quickly. The legend of the Red Baron had ended. The man who had been invincible in the sky, the pilot who had defeated so many with skill, precision, and ruthlessness, had finally met his match. But who was responsible for bringing him down? Was it the ground-based sniper who delivered the fatal shot? Or was it a more unlikely hero who contributed to his demise? The circumstances surrounding Richthofen's death sparked a great deal of speculation. Some believed that the killing shot came from Australian ground troops, who were in position near the crash site. Others believed that it was a fellow Allied pilot who had delivered the fatal blow. The British pilots had long admired the Red Baron's prowess in the air, and his death was a bittersweet victory for them. While they had taken down the man who had so terrorized the skies, they couldn't help but respect his skill and leadership. Regardless of who delivered the final shot, the Red Baron's death marked the end of an era in aerial combat. His legacy as the greatest fighter pilot of World War I was secured, but his death signaled a shift in the war. The Allies, who had previously been on the defensive, now had a boost in morale. They had taken down the greatest ace of the war, and they would continue to fight hard, knowing that the Red Baron's shadow was no longer over them. However, the war was not over, and Germany would continue to fight for several more months. The Red Baron's death did not immediately end the war, but it was a symbol of the loss of one of Germany's greatest figures. His death was mourned by many in Germany, and his legacy as the ultimate airman continued to inspire pilots across the world. For years to come, the legend of the Red Baron would be recounted in stories, books, and movies. Though the Red Baron was gone, his impact on aerial warfare remained. His skill in the air, his tactics, and his leadership set the bar for future generations of fighter pilots. In fact, many of the lessons he taught in aerial combat would continue to be taught in military academies for years after the war. The Red Baron wasn't just a fighter pilot. He was a symbol of the innovation and determination that defined aviation in the First World War. With his death, the Red Baron left behind a legacy that would inspire generations. But what does his story tell us about the nature of war, the risks of fame, and the burden of leadership? The Red Baron may have been brought down in the end, but his story is far from over. The Red Baron's death in 1918 shocked the world. A fighter pilot so skilled, so legendary, that the very idea of him being taken down seemed impossible. Yet, as the questions about how he died circulated, a twist in the story began to emerge that added a new layer to his legacy. Who truly delivered the fatal shot that ended Richthofen's reign as the most feared pilot in the skies? For many years, it was believed that the Red Baron had been shot by Australian ground troops who were stationed near the crash site. This narrative was widely accepted, especially given that the bullet that struck Richthofen came from below something that was difficult for a fellow pilot to achieve during a high-speed dogfight. But in recent years, a different version of the story has come to light, and the true identity of the Red Baron's killer may not be as straightforward as it seemed. Some historians now believe that the shot that brought down the Red Baron may have come from a Canadian pilot, Captain Arthur Roy Brown, who was engaged in a dogfight with Richthofen on that fateful day. Brown, who had been closely following Richthofen's aircraft during the battle, was in position to fire when Richthofen made a critical mistake. He flew directly across Brown's line of sight. Some believe that it was Brown's carefully aimed shot that struck the Red Baron, wounding him fatally. Though Brown's role in Richthofen's death was never definitively proven, some scholars believe that Brown's contribution to the Red Baron's demise has been underestimated for years. Others argue that the ground-based sniper fired the decisive shot. According to this theory, Richthofen's position low and close to the ground as he chased an enemy plane made him vulnerable to gunfire from the soldiers on the ground. This would explain why the fatal shot came from beneath him, and why Richthofen, despite his legendary abilities in the air, never saw it coming. The sniper theory was reinforced by the fact that the Red Baron's plane crashed in enemy territory, and that there were Australian soldiers who had a clear line of sight to Richthofen as he pursued his final kill. Another theory suggests that it was a combination of both a lucky shot from the ground and a final fatal move by a fellow Allied pilot. This theory proposes that the bullet from the ground may have weakened Richthofen's ability to control his aircraft, making him more vulnerable to an attack from Brown. The idea that two separate forces, ground troops and aerial combatants, could have combined to bring down the Red Baron adds an element of uncertainty to an otherwise clear-cut story. While we may never know with complete certainty who fired the shot that killed the Red Baron, what is clear is that his death marked the end of an era in aviation. The Red Baron's reign over the skies of World War I was unprecedented, and his death was the end of a chapter in aerial warfare. But his legend did not die with him. Far from it, in fact. The Red Baron became a symbol of not only German military power, but also the spirit of aviation itself. After his death, the Red Baron's legacy was carefully preserved by both his enemies and his countrymen. The Allies, while relieved to have eliminated their most famous adversary, recognized his exceptional abilities and military skill. His death was mourned by many of the Allied pilots who had fought against him, who acknowledged his greatness as a fighter pilot. For them, the Red Baron was more than just an enemy. He was a hero of the skies, a worthy opponent in a brutal war. In Germany, the Red Baron's death was a blow to the morale of the nation. He had become a national hero, the face of Germany's aerial prowess and its military might. His death symbolized the end of an era, but it also immortalized him as a figure in German history whose name would be remembered forever. His funeral was attended by high-ranking German officials, and his legacy as a symbol of courage, skill, and national pride endured long after the war ended. But even as the story of the Red Baron's death grew murky with different theories and speculations, the true meaning of his legacy began to take shape. How did his skill and tactics influence the future of aerial warfare? And what impact did his life and death have on the pilots who came after him? The Red Baron's story, marked by triumph and tragedy, left a lasting impression on military aviation and the world. Richthofen's influence on aerial warfare cannot be overstated. He revolutionized tactics in the sky, demonstrating that the key to victory wasn't just raw skill or brute force, but strategy, precision, and coordination. Before the Red Baron, aerial combat had been chaotic and disorganized, with pilots often acting alone in their efforts to take down enemies. But Richthofen's systematic approach, working in tandem with his squadron and using calculated tactics to outsmart his enemies, became the standard for future generations of pilots. His leadership in the German air service set a high bar for military aviation. His squadron, Jagdgeschwader 1, became a model of efficiency and deadly effectiveness. Richthofen's approach to training his pilots, fostering discipline and teamwork, ensured that his legacy would live on not just in the number of planes he shot down, but in the strategies he pioneered. After World War I, Richthofen became a legend, his story often romanticized and mythologized. Writers and filmmakers would later elevate him to the status of a heroic figure, the quintessential warrior in the sky. His iconic red aircraft became a symbol of not just German military power, but of the heroism associated with aerial combat. The Red Baron became larger than life, more than just a man, but a symbol of the brutal beauty of air warfare during the Great War. But behind the myth was a man who faced the same vulnerabilities as any soldier on the ground. The Red Baron's story is a testament to the unpredictability of war, the fine line between victory and death. His fate, like the fate of so many soldiers, was sealed not only by his own skill, but by the sheer randomness of battle. Even today, the legacy of the Red Baron continues to inspire pilots and aviation enthusiasts around the world. His story is a reminder of the price of glory and the fleeting nature of heroism. As we look back on the life of the Red Baron, we are left to reflect on how his legend still shapes our understanding of warfare, leadership, and the human spirit. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, had earned his place as one of the most legendary figures in aviation history. His name was synonymous with precision, skill, and the unparalleled dominance of the skies during World War I. But despite his extraordinary career, his death marked a bittersweet end to an era. The Red Baron had been both a symbol of invincibility and a reminder of the brutal reality of war, leaving behind a legacy that has continued to shape the field of aviation for over a century. After the war, Richthofen became more than just a hero of the sky. She became a myth. His death was marked with the kind of solemnity and respect reserved for icons. In Germany, he was mourned as a national hero, his contribution to the war effort celebrated by the military and the public alike. His memory was immortalized in countless stories, songs, and films. But beyond the romanticism, there was a deeper, more sobering legacy that revealed the true nature of war. The Red Baron's skill in the air, his leadership, and his role as a symbol of German military strength during World War I were remarkable. But his story also highlighted the immense cost of war. His death was a reminder of the toll that constant conflict takes on even the most talented and fearless individuals. It serves as a somber reflection of the impermanence of life, even for someone as seemingly invincible as Richthofen. Richthofen's story continues to captivate audiences because it reflects the universal themes of heroism, sacrifice, and the futility of war. His legacy endures in the way we think about military aviation, both in terms of its tactics and its human cost. The way he approached aerial combat, emphasizing precision, discipline, and teamwork, set the standard for future generations of pilots. He was not just a lone wolf in the sky, but a leader who understood the importance of working together to achieve success. Though the Red Baron's career lasted only a few short years, his influence on air combat cannot be overstated. He revolutionized the way aerial dogfights were fought. Prior to his rise, air combat had often been chaotic and disorganized, with pilots working alone or in small groups. Richthofen changed this by leading his squadron with precision and order. He instilled a sense of unity and discipline in his pilots, which allowed them to work together in coordinated attacks, overwhelming their opponents with strategy and force. This approach was far ahead of its time, and many of the tactics he pioneered are still used in modern air forces today. His ability to adapt and learn from each battle also set him apart from other pilots of his time. Richthofen constantly refined his tactics, always learning from each encounter. He understood the value of studying the enemy and anticipating their moves. This level of strategic thinking was what made him so effective in the air. His success was not merely a result of natural talent, but of careful planning, calculated risk-taking, and a relentless pursuit of perfection. But Richthofen's impact on aviation history goes beyond tactics and strategy. He became a symbol of what was possible in the early days of flight. His legendary status as the greatest fighter pilot of World War I inspired countless pilots who followed in his footsteps. His story became the gold standard for every aspiring pilot, and his legacy became a model for those seeking to achieve greatness in the skies. However, the Red Baron's legacy is not without its complexities. For all his military success, his story is also a reminder of the darker side of war, the cost of human life, the toll on mental health, and the long-lasting effects of conflict. Richthofen's own struggle with the psychological pressures of being the most hunted man in the sky is something that is often overlooked in the stories of his triumphs. Despite his fame and success, he was, like so many others, deeply affected by the horrors of war. His legend, though immortalized, was also a reflection of the brutal realities of the First World War. After the war ended, the Red Baron became a symbol of the sacrifices made during the conflict, but his legacy was also intertwined with the grief and destruction left in the wake of the war. The war had claimed millions of lives, and Richthofen's death, though a significant blow to Germany, was just one of many tragic losses. His story, therefore, also stands as a symbol of the countless lives lost to the madness of war, a reminder of the futility of violence and the devastating toll it takes on all sides. As the years went by, the legend of the Red Baron grew, but so did the understanding of his true impact. Was he merely a hero, a symbol of national pride, or was there more to his story, something deeper, something that we can still learn from today? In the years following his death, the Red Baron's story continued to evolve. He was no longer just a soldier. He became a cultural icon. In Germany, he was viewed as the embodiment of the country's military strength, while in the Allied countries, he was admired as a worthy adversary. The tales of his aerial victories and daring tactics were told and retold, solidifying his place as one of the greatest pilots in history. His story became the foundation of many myths, the Red Baron's image synonymous with bravery, skill, and fearlessness in the face of danger. But while his legacy as a pilot and hero endures, there are also lessons to be learned from the darker aspects of his life. The pressures of war, the toll it takes on a person's body and mind, and the deep psychological impact of being a living legend are aspects of Richthofen's story that are often glossed over. Despite his outward invincibility, the Red Baron was, at times, weighed down by the same burdens that plagued countless others who fought in the war. Today, the Red Baron's legacy is remembered in museums, documentaries, and books. His iconic red aircraft is displayed in collections around the world, and his story continues to captivate audiences. The Red Baron remains one of the most enduring symbols of World War I, and his contributions to aerial warfare are still studied and revered. His name is still spoken with respect, and his achievements continue to inspire future generations of pilots who look to his example for guidance. But beyond the medals and accolades, beyond the myths and legends, the Red Baron's legacy is ultimately a reminder of the human cost of war. He was not just a pilot, was a man, and like all men, his life was shaped by the conflicts of his time. The story of Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, is a powerful reminder of the price of greatness and the sacrifices made in the name of victory. It serves as both a celebration of skill and leadership, and as a somber reflection on the destructive power of war. The story of the Red Baron does not end in the skies or with the dogfights of World War I. His legacy continues to shape the way we think about war, leadership, and heroism. What lessons can we take from his life, and how does his story influence our understanding of combat and its impact on the human spirit? His story may have ended, but the lessons he left behind will remain with us forever. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, remains one of the most iconic and enduring figures in military history. His incredible skill in the air, his tactical brilliance, and his legacy as a hero of the skies continue to inspire aviators and military enthusiasts around the world. But behind the legend, there's more to his story, a story that goes beyond the thrilling dogfights and victories. It's a story of human ambition, the psychological toll of war, and the costs of greatness. As we reflect on the Red Baron's life and legacy, we can't help but wonder, what does his story teach us about the true nature of heroism? Was he simply a product of his time, a man driven by the need to be the best, or was there something more profound at play? The Red Baron's life raises questions about leadership, sacrifice, and the fine line between glory and destruction. We want to hear your thoughts. Was the Red Baron a true hero, or was he a symbol of the destructive nature of war? How do you think his legacy should be remembered in the context of the First World War and beyond? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth documentaries on history's most fascinating figures and events. The Red Baron's story is just one of many that shape the world we live in today. Stay tuned for more content as we continue to explore the untold stories of the men and women who changed the course of history. In our next episode, we'll dive into the life of another legendary figure of World War I, General Douglas Haig. Known for his controversial leadership during the Battle of the Somme, Haig's legacy has been debated for years. Was he a military genius, or did his decisions lead to unnecessary loss of life? Join us as we explore the man who shaped the outcome of one of the bloodiest battles in history. Like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay updated on our latest episodes.